In 1976, on a secluded Sumpter County dirt road in South Carolina near I-95, a young couple was found murdered execution style. Sadly, neither victim had identification on them, and investigators would initially try to identify them using their fingerprints, but would be unsuccessful. The man was wearing a wristwatch, and the investigators tried to use the serial number to track down the jewelry store, but were unable to. They would also have their dental records published to national dental journals, but nothing has ever come from this. So who are they? That's what investigators have been trying to figure out since 1976. The only clues found at the scene was the man was wearing a Lind Star ring with the initials JPF inscribed on it. He also had a pack of matches from Grant's truck stop. In the United States, there are only 3 Grant's truck stops. There is one in Nebraska, one in Arizona, and one in Idaho. A mechanic in York, Nebraska, thought he had worked on a van with Washington or Oregon plates that matched the couple's description. The man was also found wearing a 1975 International Motorsport Association Camel GT shirt, a shirt that is only sold at the Florida Sebring race. The weekend the couple was murdered, an IMSA race was being held at the Talladega Motor Speedway. Had they gone to that and were on their way back? As for the female, the only identifying thing about her was she had 2 distinctive moles on her left cheek. She was also found wearing American or Mexican jewelry from Southwest United States. While both victims were found wearing typical clothing for the 70s, neither were found with underwear on. One witness said he had met the couple, and the male victim claimed to be from Canada, but they were unable to identify him this way either. In December of 1976, George Lonnie Henry from Wadesboro, North Carolina, was stopped in South Carolina for driving under the influence. When his car was searched, police found a stolen gun with the serial number scratched off. Ballistics were done, and it was determined this was the murder weapon. After multiple interviews and polygraph tests, investigators were unable to determine if he was responsible for the murders. George also had an alibi. He was with his sick wife at a North Carolina hospital. George would say his brother Jim Henry gave him the gun as a gift. Since several months had passed since the murders, investigators were unable to prove his alibi or who had possession of the gun at the time of the murders. The gun was originally stolen by some thieves in the Raleigh-Durham area in North Carolina before the Henrys came into possession of it, so it's possible they had nothing to do with the murders and received the gun later. If the Henrys weren't involved in the murders, who was? During the 80s, multiple IMSA racers and race teams including John Paul Sr., the Whittington brothers, and Randy Lanier were convicted of drug smuggling. We're not talking about a small-time drug smuggling operation. They were part of a multi-million-dollar criminal organization who were smuggling tons of drugs into the United States. The racers and the race teams had strong ties with organized crime and even with the CIA. So that leads to one theory that the victims might have been drug smugglers and were taken out for some reason. The style of murder used on the victims is quite often used by the mafia when a hit is performed. This definitely seems plausible, but with little evidence in the case, it's hard to say. However, an odd coincidence is that a mobster by the name of John Rosselli, who is most known for his connection to the Kennedy assassination, was found floating face down in a bay near Miami the same day the couple was murdered. Since the male victim was wearing a shirt from Sebring, Florida, which is close to Miami, this could have been part of a larger hit by the mafia. Also, the area where the bodies were found was also known for corruption. Multiple businessmen and politicians were implicated in at least 3 murder-for-hire schemes, which targeted local bank president Charlie Dorn Smith and local mayor Clayton Bingham. Also, a few months prior to the murders, a police chief in the area was murdered by another officer in a very suspicious circumstance just a few miles from where the mystery couple's bodies were found in Olathe, South Carolina. It's possible the couple was bringing drugs to this town for the racers, and local thugs had different plans. Another question that baffles investigators all these years is why hasn't family come looking for them? A lot of mystery surrounds this case, and as of today, the victims remain unidentified and the case remains unsolved. On the evening of May 15, 1988, 8-year-old Malakia, Logan, and her sister Renee were at the park playing basketball near their apartment in Greenwood, South Carolina. Around 8:15 p.m., Renee and a friend wanted to keep playing, but Malakia, or Kia, as she was known by family members, was ready to go home, so she got on her bicycle and left. When Renee arrived home about 20 minutes later, she discovered Kia was not there. Their mother, Bernetta, would search the area around the apartment complex but couldn't find her daughter. She would then call the Greenwood Sheriff's Office to report her daughter missing. Investigators would initially treat this as a missing persons case and put out a bulletin with a description of the girl. After an initial search of the apartment complex, they would discover Malakia's bicycle in a parking lot just outside the apartment's office. This was the only clue found in the case. A deputy would spend the night on the Logan family's couch in case a kidnapper called with a ransom request or if Kia herself managed to communicate with them somehow. However, no calls were received and a real investigation into her disappearance began. On May 16, 1988, around 75 people, including citizen volunteers, would conduct another search of the area around the apartment complex with the help of law enforcement helicopters. A few days would go by with no signs of Kia or evidence to assist in the case. On May 18, 1988, investigators would release a public statement requesting help to find 2 men who were seen in the area on the day Kia went missing. The first man was described as being an older Caucasian man with graying hair. He was seen driving a blue utility-type van with dark tinted windows. The second man, who was of greater interest to investigators, was described as Caucasian, between the ages of 30 and 40, 5'8" to 5'9", and around 250 pounds. He had a pockmarked face with pointed features, and his hair is believed to have been brownish with sun streaks. A composite sketch was made of the individual and released along with the details of his vehicle, a mid-1970s dark blue or black Chevrolet Monte Carlo. Even though they had 2 different persons of interest and their vehicle description, witness said they never saw Kia near them or get into either one of their vehicles. Investigators would receive numerous tips on the case, leading them as far away as California, but nothing led to an actual suspect or arrest in the case. On October 1, 1990, over 2 years later, a deer hunter was walking along a pasture in a wooded area on the U.S. Forest Service property in Newberry County, South Carolina, when he came upon a badly decomposed human skull. The skull was found 4 miles east of the city of Newberry and 35 miles east of Greenwood. The sheriff's office, along with other law enforcement and volunteer agencies, would conduct a 3-week search of the area but were unable to find any additional remains. Numerous forensic attempts were made during the 90s to positively confirm it was Mleakia, but attempts failed until 1996 when a private genetics lab was hired in North Carolina to perform a mitochondrial DNA test. Using DNA obtained from Mleakia's parents, they were able to prove the skull did belong to Kia, a fact that was backed up by the Washington, D.C. FBI lab in 1998. Investigators believe she was killed in Greenwood County and her body was dumped in Newberry County. Between 1995 and 1996, authorities in Georgia and South Carolina were investigating a string of abductions and sexual assault cases on young African American children along a specific state highway. All 6 victims had a similar look and profile, all lived close to the highway, and were all sexually assaulted except for one who was not and was dropped off at a gas station where she was able to call for help. All the cases shared one similar suspect, a middle-aged Caucasian man with gray stubble, a pockmarked face, and a tattoo of either a dragon or a snake on one of his biceps. Eventually, Charles Wade Hampton was tracked down and fit the description. He was willing to work with investigators and even gave them blood and hair samples and granted them permission to search his car and home. During the searches, they uncovered child pornography and even children's underwear that were sent off for forensic testing. Charles would openly confess to committing several of the abductions and willingly gave investigators details on the cases. However, when police drove him around to many of the abduction sites, Charles had a lack of details on the cases, which led investigators to believe he was making up the confessions. Eventually, DNA testing would show that the same person was involved in all 6 abductions. However, Charles was not the one who committed them. In 1996, Charles would plead guilty to drilling a hole in a women's restroom at a Georgia rest stop and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He would immediately stop cooperating with investigators upon his conviction. When he was released from prison, he would immediately be rearrested for the 1995 abduction of a 7-year-old girl in Richland County, South Carolina. He originally confessed to the crime, but would later recant his confession, resulting in the case being dropped due to the lack of evidence. In November 2002, Charles was transferred to a jail in Greenwood County, South Carolina, where he was charged with the murder and abduction of Malakia Logan. Investigators believed they had strong evidence linking him to the crime and were set to pursue the death penalty. However, Charles once again would immediately recant his confession, plead not guilty, and this would sadly force prosecutors to drop the case against him due to lack of evidence. Prosecutors said they would pursue new charges against Charles if new evidence ever surfaces. However, as of today, this case remains unsolved. On the morning of November 22, 1985, in Aiken County, South Carolina, Donna Arrington would get up to make her husband coffee at 7 a.m. as he got ready for work. On her way back to bed, she would check on her 4-year-old son, Jeremy Grice, who appeared to be asleep in his bed. However, by 10 a.m., when Donna was awoken by the sounds of her 7-month-old daughter crying, she realized Jeremy was not at home, and what she thought was him sleeping was actually his bed covers rumpled up in a heap on top of the bed. Since Jeremy had a habit of burrowing in his bed covers when he slept, she originally thought nothing of it. Now realizing her baby boy was missing, she began frantically searching in and around the trailer, but found no signs of Jeremy. She would then report him missing to the Aiken County Sheriff's Office. The sheriff, Carol G. Heath, called in all of the off-duty personnel to help search the scene, but they found no signs of Jeremy. A neighbor said they saw Jeremy outside of the family's trailer playing with his dog by the mailbox around 8:45 a.m. However, Donna found this strange because of the cold winds and heavy rains that day. She would also point out that Jeremy had left his favorite jacket and shoes in his room. Also, his dog was his best friend and never left his side, so despite the neighbor seeing Jeremy with the dog was still at home and not with Jeremy. This is definitely one of the strangest details in the case. Did Jeremy wander outside barefoot in a rainstorm by himself? A 100-member search party would comb a 3-mile radius around the home. Investigators would check throughout the neighborhood in hopes of witnesses or even any possible leads. Family members were also questioned and polygraphed, with many turning up negative results. Fearing Jeremy might have drowned in one of the 2 nearby ponds, authorities would have them drained and even have a helicopter flying overhead searching but still no signs of Jeremy. Jeremy's father, Ray Grice, spent all hours of the night searching and calling out for his son, but still no luck. After 3 unsuccessful days of searching, the sheriff's office announced Jeremy was most likely kidnapped. This is where the case would turn cold. Over the years, they have received numerous tips and possible sightings of Jeremy, but they all led to a dead end. Flyers were handed out and reward money offered, but again, nothing. Child serial killer William Ernest Downs was questioned about the disappearance, but he would have been a teenager at the time Jeremy vanished. William would deny any connection and has never been charged in the case. The family thinks a local neighbor most likely abducted Jeremy, but still mystery surrounds this case, and as of today, it remains unsolved. Around 1:30 a.m. on September 24, 1992, Dail Dinwiddie was stranded at a nightclub in Columbia, South Carolina, after her friends accidentally left her. With no ride home, she started walking north on Hardin Street and has never been heard from again. The night before her disappearance, she went to a U2 concert at the Williams-Brice Stadium in Columbia, South Carolina, with a group of friends. When the concert was over, around 11:15 p.m., she and her friends went to Jungle Jim's, a popular nightclub in the 5 Points area of Columbia. Dail would get separated from her friends, which led to the friends accidentally leaving her. Her friends would leave around 1 a.m. on September 24th and thought Dail had found another ride home, possibly from her parents. However, this was not the case, and Dail was still in the nightclub when she was abandoned. Dail would wander around for about 15 minutes looking for her friends and would eventually ask a bouncer if he had seen them. After chatting with the bouncer for a short time, she would leave on foot down Hardin Street. This was the last time she was ever seen. When the Columbia police were called in to investigate the disappearance, they labeled it a kidnapping from the get-go, saying there was nothing in her background to indicate that she would deliberately go away. According to a friend of Dail, she lived at home and was looking to start graduate school and was interested in art and was even taking an art class. They also said she was definitely not the type of girl to just run off. Dail also had a medical condition. She suffered from severe asthma and allergies and had to get injections twice a week and use an inhaler. Since Dail didn't take any of her medications with her the night she was out, it definitely shows she planned to return home. The most likely theory is Dail was abducted and murdered. Not only that, but she was an extremely cautious individual and would have never gotten into a car with a stranger, which leads family to believe she knew her abductor. Also, the 5 Points area is usually extremely busy at that time of the night and is a popular party area for college students, so it is even more unlikely that a stranger abducted her without someone noticing. While there have been some suspects in the case, one famous suspect was looked into, Renato Javier Ray Rivera. He is currently serving on death row after being convicted of killing a police officer, and he confessed to the murders of 4 Georgia women and is suspected of killing others. He also lived in Columbia, South Carolina at the time of Dail's disappearance and was attending the University of South Carolina. Besides him being a convenient suspect, there are no actual clues to link him to her disappearance. Investigators have even visited him in prison, but came out empty-handed. Investigators continue looking for answers in the case, but as of today, it remains unsolved. Janice Wessinger would leave her home on foot in Aiken, South Carolina on the morning of November 22, 1997, to go for a walk. She would never return home. Janice and her daughter, Tamara Herber, lived in a rural area of Aiken County in South Carolina. She was a triage nurse at Aiken Regional and was an active member of her church where she played the piano. Tamara was 20 years old at the time and was living at home the morning her mother went for a walk. Janice had plans that day to go visit a friend in the hospital, so when she left that morning, Tamara, who was still in the bed, assumed her mother had gone to the hospital. Tamara stated, "That day I got up and left, assuming she went to the hospital, and I didn't return until around midnight because that was my curfew. When I got home, I immediately realized something was wrong. My mom had a routine, and at night she would close the blinds and turn on some lights. All the lights were off. Everything was the same as I had left it in the morning. I went inside, called for her, and she wasn't there." Knowing something was seriously wrong, Tamara called the sheriff's office, who instead of filing a missing persons report, instructed Tamara to go look for her mother. As unbelievable as this is, Tamara would oblige, and with her boyfriend Cliff's help, they would drive around looking for Janice. Still unable to find her, they would call the sheriff's office once again and ask for help. Finally, at 2 a.m. in the morning, over 2 hours later, a deputy would arrive and fill out a report. Tamara would ask the deputy if a bloodhound team could search for her mother, but the deputy supervisor denied the request. So, Tamara called the pastor of her mother's church and her father for help. Members of the church would help with the search that night. Around daybreak on November 23, 1997, 2 deacons would come across Janice's body in a wooded area about 50 yards off Kedron Church Road. Janice still had her curlers in her hair when she was found severely beaten, raped, and stabbed to death. Her glasses were also found nearby, where police believe she was attacked while out on her morning walk. This is pretty much where the case started to run cold. The sheriff's office would try to increase the public's attention to the case in 1998 by buying a billboard that read, "You know who killed me, why won't you help?" But it never led to any arrest. While Tamara has tried over the years to get the evidence from her mother's case, which has been studied by different forensic teams, the Aiken County Sheriff's Office has refused. One strange thing we know about the case is Tamara said her mother had asked her about a spare key that was missing in the months leading up to her murder. That key was found sometime after the funeral in a flower pot on the porch. However, that was not its usual place. After all these years, there has never been a suspect or persons of interest publicly announced in the case, which led Tamara to state, "I have to say, the sheriff's office has really failed on this case." Tamara would try and bring the case back to the public's attention in 2020 by hanging signs and passing out flyers. However, as of today, this case remains unsolved.